Okay, good evening, brethren and sistren, and for those watching online. By the way, for you folks online, I want to apologize for last week. What happened was my camera, my phone, was set on, I think, too bright of a screen. The end result is that the battery ran out, and what happened was the little bar appears on an iPhone that says you have, very little battery left, and apparently that bar that appears stopped all the sound from coming through. So apparently last week, when we got to the section of the passage where the little boy goes, my head, the sound disappears. And as our sister Ruth Eichacker put it, you left us hanging. What happened to the kid? I think she could read the rest of the Bible. Yes. They can read the text. They can see what happened. But anyway, happy Resurrection Day post, one day later. Great to see you guys here. We have our visitors traveling from the faraway land of Israel. They are returned, all bushy-tailed and bright-eyed, and that's great. And we had a great Easter.
Yes. I thought I was going crazy for a second. I'm like, why am I hearing this bird? Like, there's a bird. You guys hear it?
You hear?
It's chirping. You can hear it. You can hear it. Can you hear it?
I cannot. If there's a bird in here,
It was almost like it was in the roof or something.
but I can tell you whether there is or not, I can't get it.
It sounds like it was in the roof. Sorry.
It's better than having a bat flying around, if that's the case. A funny story, we have a sister in Syosset, Maureen, and she was not in church this particular Sunday, but I made the comment that we have a bat in here and we have called the exterminator. Well, this particular woman is a lover of animals. She made her way to church to protect that bat and to swish it out of the building because she did not want that bat exterminated. In hindsight, I would have called animal control. I think she would have handled that because I said the exterminator. She was not too happy. Hey, let's open with a word of prayer, shall we? Father, we thank you that we've had a chance to spend some time tonight to study your word, and we're looking forward to what you're going to say to us and see more of this incredible prophet, Elisha. Father, we don't always understand what he's doing, how he's thinking, but we are impressed with it. Lord, we pray that as we spend time reading these words, we do so with an anticipation to learn how we can apply it in our own lives. And Father, being that this is the day after Easter, we know we live in the power of the resurrected Lord. And we want to keep that in mind as we press on and anticipate great things from a great God. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, let's look at our quiz. I thought this was a pretty easy quiz. I don't know whether I was just feeling grace overwhelming me or not, but it just felt easy. And with that in mind, we'll see, Mary, how you do this one, Okay, let's go on. Here we go. The book of 2 Kings focuses on A, the latter kings of Israel, B, the latter kings of Judah, C, Elijah, D, the latter kings of Judah and Israel. Now, this is so pathetically easy, I'm embarrassed that I even put this question here. But let's see how it is the latter kings of Judah and Israel. Now, you may say, but Elijah's mentioned. Yeah, in the first chapter. And then he drops off entirely. He ascends to heaven on his fiery chariot. Yeah, he's not really focusing on. And it's definitely not just Israel or just Judah. In fact, right now we're dealing almost exclusively with Israel, which is all evil kings, but it has one pretty incredible prophet. So it's the latter kings of Judah and Israel. Who is follically impaired? A man I respect highly. There's Elijah, Elisha, Ahab, and Isaiah. And again, so easy, so easy. It is Elisha. So yes, there's a place in God's kingdom for us baldies. And I appreciate that.
You didn't add Kojak.
Yes, exactly. That you date yourself, Bob, with that reference. No one in the young community had even heard of that name. But yes, I am one of that community. And so, yeah, I get a kick out of that. Next one. 3. Who is existence impaired? Who is existence impaired? What a strange phrase. Baal, Yahweh, Baal-zebub, Asherah. And the answer is everybody except Yahweh, because they're not gods. They are gods of people, but as Isaiah says, you know what your problem is? You go into the woods, you cut down a tree, you carve it into the shape of a god, and you worship it. With the other half of the tree, you cook your dinner. That's what Isaiah says. I mean, he's right. I actually had a conversation with somebody who's near and dear to my heart, and I said to this person, that's what you're doing, because this person, I believe in God. I said, tell me about your God. And I said, well, your God looks an awful lot like you, because you've created a God in your own image. So how do you actually have the confidence to worship this God you say you're worshiping when you're just making up all their attributes yourself? Boy, I don't have enough faith for that. And they didn't appreciate my sarcasm, but that's the way it is. When people say, well, I think God is this, well, you know what? You must be an amazing person of faith, because you just created a God out of the figment of your imagination, and now you're worshiping it. Wow. Anyway, that's what Isaiah the prophet says, and here I love that question. Existence impaired. All right, next one. Who likes a little music when he prophesies? Oh, what pathetically easy questions here. Who likes a little music when he prophesies? Elisha, Elijah, Obadiah, the man of God. And what I'm looking for is Elisha. However, if you put the man of God, he's been called that, so you can give yourself grace for that one too. But it is definitely Elisha, which is fun. Because this only happens a couple times in Scripture. One is in Samuel, one is here, where there's musical background. So when people say, in a modern church, that the organist plays or the piano plays while the pastor is speaking, there's validity to that biblically. Some people might find it distracting, but in certain church cultures, it's very accepted and very understood. I remember when we had Jim Cymbala here, he really likes it. And so he's wrapping up his message, and this is the way he says, as the musicians come forward. And so he's still preaching, but he wants those musicians on the stage to start playing. So when Jim Cymbala was here and my worship director was like downstairs having a cup of coffee, I'm like, oh no! And so I'm running down, get your butt up there! Jim Cymbala has asked for a musician. And so, he heads up and starts playing the piano. But yeah, there's validity to having a little music while you're doing it. And when you think of it, for some, it does help focus in on what is happening, what is taking place. I personally like when we're doing like Holy Communion for a musician to start playing as I'm talking about taking the elements. It just kind of gets my heart and mind in what's happening. And truth be told, most of us who are believers, we know what the pastor's going to say. This is the cup of the new covenant given in my blood for the remission of sins. I don't need to be, super paying attention to what the pastor's saying, because I've heard it all my life. And now I just want to be in the right mode. Apparently, music can be a powerful medium for that. Did you bring your own popcorn or something here?
No, this is from the delicious bakery.
Oh, okay. The reason I'm saying this for you folks online, you can have your own snacks from your refrigerator while we watch. But we have a sister here who has a bag, and she's like, so. Yes. The thing is, this is the good thing. If I get boring, I got a little food to, keep engaged. All right, next one. God instructs the Israelites to dig ditches, watch him fill the valley with water, ruin Moab's fields, plug the wells of Moab. So easy, so easy, so easy. It's all of them. So now here's the deal. Dig ditches is not in the translation I'm using, but I gave you a big elongated teaching that is actually the old New International Version, and most translations say dig ditches. And so a lot of preachers love preaching this passage. You do your part, God will do his part, and the victory will come. But the newer translations, New Living Translation, the update of the NIV, says, no, God does everything here. Just watch him fill the valley with water. And then the instructions were for the Israelite army that they were to ruin Moab's fields and plug the wells of Moab. So that's all part of what was instructions too. So A and B, depending on which translation you have, but we referred to both of them, and C and D are just plain instructions that take place. Number 6, the widow whose sons were to be enslaved may have been Obadiah's wife, Elijah's wife, from Moab, a potter. And the answer is Obadiah's wife. You would only have that answer if you came to class. So that might be one of the harder ones of the class. Now, what happened here while you guys were away in Israel, actually walking on the Holy Land? You may remember from a few weeks ago, there was this prophet, not the prophet Obadiah in the Bible, but another Obadiah, who, while the persecution of God's people was taking place, he hid 100 prophets and fed them. And so the thought is, if you're feeding 100 people, that's a lot of money. And in our passage last week, the creditors were after them, and now Obadiah is dead. And so the wife can't pay the creditors. And so here was Josephus, the Jewish historian at the time of Christ. He was born just as Christ ascended to heaven. But Josephus says that he heard a tradition that this is the very same Obadiah who hid the prophets. And it makes some sense, because that would be a prophet who's broke. And because he was mortgaging his house to feed these prophets. And so there would be a wonderful reason for Elisha to have compassion on this particular person. To the Moabites, the valley filled with water looked like an ocean, a mirror, blood, an army. And the answer is, it looked like blood. It looked like blood. And I used the example last week. Have you ever been to Sedona? All the red rocks, very pretty, very attractive, but that area is very similar to Sedona, and if it was filled with water and it's reflecting off the red rocks, it could very much look like a reddish tint, to which they interpreted that, oh my goodness, they've just slaughtered each other. Let's go in and conquer. And in the end, they were defeated in that battle. The Shunammite woman asked Elisha for, now this is the woman who built a room for Elisha. And she asked Elisha for a son, food, nothing, help from the king. Now I'm going to ask, anyone have a guess on this one? Anyone? What was that? C is correct. Bob, hang your head in shame. She asked for nothing. In fact, she was very concerned. Don't build my hopes up here. Do not build my hopes up. And I understand that. There is a song I listened to. There was a singer from the 80s. He was like a punk, new wave Christian singer. Believe it or not, there was such a thing, named Steve Taylor. But he had a line in a song which was this: "Since I gave up hope, I feel a lot better." And, there's truth to that. When you have hope, you're like building yourself up for a letdown. But if you have no hope, like for example, the market, I'm referring to like Wall Street, has bombed out so much this winter that I'm at the point I have very little hope. So I stopped worrying about it. But the first time, like last year, the market did really good. And you start like counting the money, like, oh, this is great, this is awesome. And then when it plummets, you're like, But then when it just keeps on plummeting and keeps on plummeting and keeps on plummeting, you're like, what am I going to do? My life is in God's hands anyway. My accountant, actually it's my mother's accountant, he called me and said, we have to pay an extra $6,000 in taxes. I'm like, why? It's because your mother's account made a lot of money last year. I said, but she lost it all this year. Doesn't matter. It's based on last year. And so I was like, that's very depressing. But that's life. And so you deal with it. But she asked for nothing. She did not want to be let down. But, he said, no, we're going to give you something wonderful. You're going to have a son. That's why she was highly disappointed about the death of her son. Which moves us to number 9. The Shunammite woman lost her son, but not her husband, her faith. Now, I only have 2 answers here, and I did mention this specifically. Now, her husband's fine. He survived. But she didn't lose her faith. And why we say that is because she hunted that prophet down. She had that boy in the prophet's room, dead, lying on a bed, and that has to be absolute amazing faith to say, no, he ain't dead. He ain't dead. I'm getting the prophet. What was that?
She stood with him for a few hours until he passed away.
Yes.
She was
Holding him. Holding him.
hours, and then when he finally died, that's when she took
Yep, and she takes off. And she's also persistent. Elijah says to Gehazi, just take my staff, put it on the kid, which, by the way, bombed, didn't work. But then she's like, you're coming with me to Elisha. And when Elisha got there, it wasn't as easy as he thought it was. I guess it required a lot of faith on his part, too. But, she still had her faith. And I have to say, that's a beautiful thing when you see that, when somebody has their faith. It's beautiful. I've shared this story a few times, not with this group very often, but probably a few years I was here in the church, there was a woman in this church who had a diagnosis of cancer, very serious cancer. And she was at North Shore Hospital, and she was expected to pass soon. I did not know the woman well. I'm fairly new to the church. But I went to North Shore Hospital, and it's one of these hospital visits you're not excited to go to because it's a terminal patient. I gearing myself up, trying to memorize scriptures that I can encourage her with. I come into her room, and it is like the Shekinah glory is present in this room. This woman was filled with joy, filled with happiness, and I talked to the nurses at the nurses station. They said to me, we go into her room just to pick ourselves up. And here they're going into the room of a person who's terminally ill just to rejoice. And I left her room like walking on clouds. Her name is Marianne Tully. Some of you may remember the name if you ever heard of Tully Contracting. Her husband was the owner of, they built the viaduct in Roslyn. But blessed woman. And when she passed, I got the privilege to doing her funeral. Her family comes to faith because they saw it in their mother-in-law and that kind of thing. Just beautiful, beautiful story. I'm just saying, keeping your faith, it smells like heaven. It just smells like heaven. And by the way, she passed, but she passed with faith. It doesn't mean when you pass, you're just trusting God. That's all you're doing. And sometimes God says you're coming home. Other times God says, no, you're going to be healed. But it's all faith regardless in terms of what you're doing. So beautiful, beautiful story.
Wait a minute. Technically, she didn't lose her husband either.
I know that.
Right. So she made 2 answers.
The woman lost her son, but not. You're right. Wayne has reminded me that sometimes the teacher lacks a few brain cells. They're technically both right. They are both right. So look at that. You just got another grace question because the teacher was caught being stupid. Okay, there we go. Number 10. Elisha feeding the 100 should remind us of A, Moses, B, Jesus, C, Elijah, D, Gideon? And the answer is everyone but Gideon. Now why? Moses in the wilderness, the people are fed with manna, the water from the rock. They're fed with quail. Jesus, the breaking of the loaves, the feeding of the 5,000. And Elijah did something very similar. Not as big a scale, but he did it. This is why the studying of Elijah and Elisha are very important as pre-messianic images that show up later when we look at the Gospels. This is why you see references to Elijah and Elisha all through the Gospels. Actually, all through the New Testament. One of the things you can't help but notice is these two prophets are so dominant. They're very uniquely amazing individuals. And the later prophets, they're not known for miracles. They're known for prophetic word. But Elisha and Elijah, they're known for prophetic word and miracles. So they really stand out as unique individuals.
What did Elijah do?
Say that again, Bob?
What did Elijah do in that last question?
Oh, what he also fed. Remember how the food never ran out with the widow? It's the same thing here. Make me some food and you'll have all the food you need. So Elijah does the miracle of food too. So how'd you do? Anyone get 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10? That's okay. But I thought I'd get some real winners here. 8.5. That's good. Anyone else will get 8 here? Barbara. But she's being so humble. Wayne married a humble woman. And Wayne, it's delightful to have you back to pick on. And by the way, mutually. You can pick on me, I pick on you. But I love having my brother here. Feisty brother. All right, so you're curious about how Easter was at the church? Most people don't get to see this, but you're in my class. So I'm going to show you. So Henry sent this to the staff yesterday, and I just think it's kind of cool to see. This is the stats of Easter. So this week, that's the first one, we had, it's the first number, 2,553. Now, the breakdown of that is listed below, where you see 746 in Manhasset, online 345. By the way, that's counting the online only once, so there could be 3 people watching, but we're only counting it once. Syosset, 977. Anyone here from Syosset Sunday? You just saw how crowded it was. It got more crowded as the day wore on. The biggest service in Syosset was the third service. That blew me away. Usually there's between 60 and 80 people in the third service. There were close to 400 in the third service. It was amazing. And then the last one, Westbury, and you were there, 485. Normally about 280. And so it was a great day. These are pictures from the service. So there's David leading, there's Henry, there's myself. But it was a great morning. And say it again. What is the membership of the church? About 350. So and this is a very common thing in mainline churches, like the Congregational Church on Northern Boulevard. What you'll find is they have a membership, let's say, of 200, but they'll have 70 come to church. And the others are on the rolls, but never come. Evangelical churches tend to be the exact opposite. Smaller membership and larger attendance. And in our case, like when Pastor Henry was voted in as senior pastor, he got 258 votes to like 2 or something like that. But the thing is, that's a very important vote, voting the next pastor. But people, most people in this church grew up Catholic. Now, at a Catholic church, do you vote for anything? No. The bishop just says this is the way it's going to happen. And so if that's the way you grow up, coming to a church in which there's actually chances to vote is like totally out of their mind. You know, it's like not something you do. And so that's interesting. As a egotistical, fleshly man, though, my last Easter at the Tillis Center had 2,967. So Steve's ego is still very strong and firm here. Now, in fairness, probably the online could be double that number. So we probably had, when you count the online, over 3,000. But we don't really know, so we'll count my number from 3 years ago, above that. But no, really, it was a fun day, a great day, and it's Easter is just a blessed time for the church to get together and to celebrate the Lord and the resurrection. So I thought you'd appreciate seeing that. So let's go to our passage now, and we're going to look at chapter 5. We're going to take it to chapter 8, well, the end of chapter 7 today. And this is an adventure of the prophet Elisha. I mean, just an amazing prophet. And I want to say here, I don't always figure out what he's doing, why he's doing it, and what's taking place. And I'll tell you, I had lunch with Pastor Nathan today. Parenthetical announcement, the prophet Nathan will be teaching next week. So he's done with his apologetics class, and I shall be in Nevada for a week. So with that in mind, I held back till after Easter. And so I'm going on another one of my frequent little junkets to use my vacation time. But Pastor Nathan will be here. And but anyway, we had lunch together. And I asked him a question, which to me is a fascinating question. When Elisha does something miraculous, is it always because of the power and choice of God? Or did God give Elisha power and Elisha used it as he saw fit? Maybe with God's endorsement, maybe with not. And I'm only saying this, if you remember the end of John chapter 20, when Jesus breathes on his disciples and says, receive the Holy Spirit. What you forgive will be forgiven. Who you don't forgive will not be forgiven. He's giving them authority. And if they have authority, could it be that Elisha has this authority? And so when we see Elisha do some things, for example, ask for bears to maul people who say, hey, go up, bald head. When I struggle with that a little bit, that seems to be a pretty vicious response to an insult. Hey, you baldy. And so it makes me wonder. And so Nathan and I played with that a little bit. I want to remind you of the genre of Scripture we're looking at. It's narrative. What is the point of narrative? The camera is rolling. We're seeing what happened. Often, there's not a commentary as to whether it was right or wrong. We're just seeing this is what happened. However, on the other side of the coin, the very fact that it's a miracle means it wouldn't have happened without God's power. So is God saying, this has my stamp of endorsement? I'm just letting you know, I think that's an interesting question to wrestle with. Is it because Elisha has this authority and God lets him do it? Or is it God always saying it has my stamp of approval on everything? Implicitly it does, because it's based on God's power. But you know what? There's evil in the world, and God could stomp that out with the snap of a finger. But he chooses not to. That's all part of free will, and it's all part of, what's taking place. I'm just giving you the wrestling with this question that I have wrestled with. Yes?
In 1 Chronicles 16:22 and Psalms 105:15, it says, touch now mine anointed and do my prophets no harm.
Right.
So when you talk about a scenario, I thought about maybe he
Right. So what you guys online are not hearing is the phrase, it does say in the scripture, touch not my anointed. Now, just a quick comment on that. That verse is often abused by people like me, pastors. In other words, somebody sees that I'm stealing from the church coffers, and they confront me on it. And I say, touch not the anointed of the Lord. There are a lot of modern pastors who have used that phrase, don't mess with the pastor. But there's a couple things. Do we ever see Elisha anointed? No, he receives a mantle. But there is a literal anointing in the Old Testament. For example, the pouring of oil on a head. And so David did not want to mess with Saul, because Saul was the anointed of God. And so there is this definite, but does that automatically translate for all people that speak for God?
Will
And
he be considered a prophet?
say it again.
Will he be considered a prophet?
He definitely, which one? Elisha is a prophet, absolutely. But not Elijah or Elisha. They're prophets. But are they defined as anointed? Oh, okay. We have a very sharp sister here.
Touch not my anointed, and do my prophets no harm. So, it's still
Okay.
as our prophets.
The continuing, I want to make sure our online people hear this. She mentioned the other part of the verse, which is, and do my prophets no harm. You know what? I will give that to you. So that is interesting. Now, what made you even pop that in your head?
Well, that scripture comes to my mind because I always hear touch not my anointing. So I Googled it quickly and I read that whole thing.
That's very good. I like that. So I think the statement here has some credibility, and I can't push back against that because it does say that. The only other thing I would say is, I'm not sure, like these yous who said, go up, you bald head. They didn't harm him yet. They hurt his feelings.
Right, because God doesn't tell us to curse people. That's not of God. God doesn't do that. So it has to be, I think, a little more in there.
Yeah,
Otherwise, it'd be dangerous with powers.
right. I think what you're raising, though, is a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. This is where we think together and grow in that. What was the verse that said that? One was Chronicles, one was Psalms.
1 Chronicles 16:22.
1 Chronicles 16:22.
And Psalms 105:15.
Psalm 105:15. Good insights. Thank you for that. That helps. All right, let's look at our passage. Chapter 5, verse 1. And I want to show you a map, because in this map you see Israel, which is the northern kingdom. You see the southern kingdom, Judah. And now you see up north, Syria. And that would be the country also known as Aram. So think Syria and Aram are the very same place. You who just came back from Israel, you can see that in this point, Syria owns Dan. You went to Dan, so you know a little bit of that. You also went to a place called Bet-Shan, and Bet-Shan would be in this area too. You did not go to Damascus, because that is deep into Syria today. But this gives you an idea where this is about to take place. Now, Naaman was the commander of the army of the king of Aram. See, Syria. He's the army over there. He was a great man in the sight of his master, highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. So you have this fascinating story of a very successful soldier with a serious ailment. Now, just so you know who's king, Jehoram is king in Israel at this time, and Ben-Hadad, B-E-N, new word Hadad, H-A-D-A-D, is king in Aram. And we see this phrase that I think is very, very important. The Lord had given victory to Aram. The principle that is evident all through the scripture is whether Israel loses or Israel wins. Who has determined that? It's always God. And I want to show you a verse that makes this point. This is from Daniel, chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands. Israel, in this case Judah, loses because of the Lord. This is a principle that must be understood the entire Bible. There is one God. So no matter what is happening, you keep that in mind. God is the one who is in charge. God is the one who is in charge. And I think that's very, very helpful. Have you ever heard of a book called Through the Gates of Splendor? Elizabeth Elliot is the author of it, and it is about these 5 missionaries who were killed by the Auca Indians. Now, it was an amazing tragedy, made news all over the world. This happened in the 50s. Jim Elliot was the missionary who was most famous with this. And they're slaughtered. But their spouses decided, we are going to stay and bring Christ to the Auca Indians. The tribe converts. And their children are raised with the Auca Indians. The very people that killed their dad are helping to raise these kids. Amazing story. But one of the kids, and I can't remember if the name is Nick Saint or Steve Saint. One is the dad, one is the kid. But he wrote an article in Christianity Today in which he said, more or less, God killed my dad. Now, he didn't say it quite so boldly like that, but this is what he meant. Nothing happened to my dad that God didn't have authority over. He could have stopped it right then and there. But you know what? He was still in charge. And because that happened, I saw my mom participate in leading an entire tribe to Christ. And I have in turn experienced many blessings because of God's choice to allow my father to die. Could God have stopped that instantaneously? Absolutely. But he didn't. So I like this thought. The king of Aram has had success. The only reason they have had success is because the Lord granted victory. So now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and taken a captive of a young girl from Israel. So at this point, there are lots of skirmishes taking place and between Israel and Aram. Israel is not a vassal state of Aram. In other words, there's independence. But there is this like Israel invades, Aram invades. There's these constant skirmishes taking place. And a young girl from Israel was taken captive. And she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of leprosy. Now, pause for one moment. When you see leprosy, we don't know exactly what kind of skin disease he had. Leprosy is kind of a catch-all term in the Bible. In other words, it's not necessarily Hansen's disease that we think of leprosy today. It is probably a contagious skin disease of some sort, bacteria-related, and it is transferable. But whatever is happening, we're not positive of that disease, but it's a skin disease. That we know. But I want you to see what this slave girl said. If only my master would see not a prophet, but the prophet. The article is there. And when you think of the article, I want you to think in terms of if somebody says to you, I'm going to a restaurant in Manhasset, or somebody says, I'm going to the restaurant of Manhasset, you can immediately tell by that statement they mean the best restaurant in Manhasset. So they might say Brian and Cooper's, or some other La Coquille, or some restaurant that they feel is the best restaurant in Manhasset. This "the" is saying, go see the prophet par excellence. In other words, there's a school of the prophets. And sometimes those guys get some insights. Remember the prophets say, hey, do you know the Lord is going to take your master away? They say that to Elisha. That's insight. That's pretty cool. But Elisha, he raises the dead. He feeds the hungry. I mean, there's a lot more going on, so he is the prophet. And so Naaman went to his master, the king, and says what the girl from Israel said. So the king says, by all means go. The king of Aram replied, I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver. A talent, altogether 10 talents is 750 pounds of silver. That's a lot of silver. And 6,000 shekels of gold. That is 150 pounds of gold. That's a lot of gold. So he's coming with quite a bit of wealth here, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, with this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so that you may cure him of leprosy. There's no mention of a prophet here. How would you like to get that letter? A king who is very strong, that you have been fighting, says, here's my commander of the army, please heal him of an incurable disease. Hi, my friend has 4th stage pancreatic cancer and 4th stage lung cancer. Heal him and send him back. Thank you. What do you do with that? And you might do the same thing that the king of Israel does. What? So what happens when this occurs? So we read, as soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes, which is a sign of grief in the Middle East, and said, am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send somebody to be cured of leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me. So he feels that this is a prelude to war, and it looks pretty grim. So apparently word got out that the king is freaking out, or Elisha has insight, but it seems like it's the former. And we read, when Elisha the man of God heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message. Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. Elisha, not unfamiliar with sarcasm like his mentor, Elijah, points out, there is a prophet in Israel. Why are you so upset? There is something that can be done. And so that's the expression, send him my way. Verse 9, so Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Pretty big entourage knocking at the door. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. So, we have some friends that were just in Israel. When you went to the Jordan River, was that like this beautiful, sparkling blue river? No, it's a muddy, murky, you can't see into the water very far. It is not really a pleasant looking river. In fact, it gets worse as you go down. I understand you went to both parts, one near the Sea of Galilee, which is where they do the baptisms, but you also went to the other baptism site, which is even murkier. And so here is the thing. Probably Naaman thought he was doing a ceremonial cleansing, kind of like a baptism. And he's thinking, if I've got to do a baptism, can I do it in any water? Can I just do it in the rivers and by Damascus? Can I just do it there? And his servant challenges him on that. So he's probably not thinking that his leprosy is going to wash off in this. He's probably thinking it's some kind of cleansing ceremonial act. But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, cure me of leprosy. He's looking for a magic trick, is what it seems. Now, I have a speculation here. My speculation is that Elisha did not come to the door intentionally. I mean, we're not talking big houses here. He was probably 15 feet away and doesn't bother going out. I think this is all about faith. I think he's trying to inspire in Naaman faith. And let's see what he does. And so what's going to happen with this? Just send the servant out. Because, I could see it being kind of insulting. It doesn't even come out. And you kind of want that rigmarole. And, we see it here too at church. I have been told, Pastor, please don't stand in front to pray with people. Because nobody then goes to the rest of the prayer team. Because they think the prayer of the pastor is the one that's going to heal them. But that's baloney. My prayers are no more effective than anyone else's prayers. It is the Lord who heals. So I've been told by several people, stand by the door and greet people. You're more effective there saying hi to people, and allow people up front that are just regular prayer team people to do the praying. And, they do that. But people kind of want the pastor to come, anoint with oil, lay my hands, because I have the power in me and it's going to come out. I mean, I'll grant this. Sometimes it helps people's faith, in terms of, the pastor prayed for me, that kind of thing. I get it. There is a sense of faith that comes from that. Yes?
I don't know what the church, everything the church believes in, okay? But do you believe that some people have the power of healing?
So the question is, do certain people have a gift of healing?
The gift of the Holy Spirit?
I do believe that, because that's what the New Testament teaches, unequivocally. My friends, and I do call them friends, who are cessationists, in other words, who believe that the supernatural doesn't happen today in the church, you don't reach that conclusion reading the Bible. I'm sorry, John MacArthur. You're wrong. You cannot walk away from the New Testament without that conclusion. You're nuancing it. Is there a certain person who may have that specific gift? I do believe. The New Testament teaches that. Do all have the gift of healing, Paul says? 1 Corinthians 12. Do all have the gift of tongues? Do all have the gift of interpretation? Paul is clearly implying, yes, there are people with these various gifts. I honestly think it often relates that these folks have a unique amount of faith, and they're able to exercise their faith. Now, one thing is absolutely sure. On the opposite side, if they're doing it to build their egos, and having to start their faith ministry, and make comments about that, they're making a mistake. And by the way, this is something that is a personal pet peeve of mine. The guy who founded the Vineyard Fellowship of Churches, his name is John Wimber. John Wimber was a part of a Calvary Chapel movement, but then he thought, there's not enough signs and wonders here, and he wanted to see more expression of God's miracles and healing. But he tells his story as to when he started believing this. So when he was in college, he was an unbeliever. And you know how if you've ever been to college, InterVarsity or Cru, Campus Crusade, they set up tables in the student union and they give things away. So you can get like a free New Testament, and they want to invite you to come to one of their meetings. So John Wimber goes at his college, he sees one of these tables by one of these student ministries, and they have a New Testament free. So he says, can I have one of these? Yeah, you can have it. They were delighted to give it to him. He reads the New Testament in 1 week, comes back to the person working the table and asks this question. Hey, I read the book. Really? What do you think of it? It was amazing. I just got one question for you. What's that? When do we get to do the stuff? And the person said, what do you mean the stuff? The miracles. When do we get to do that? And the person was like, humana, that wasn't sure how to answer it. But the truth is, if you read the New Testament, you do not walk away a cessationist. You just don't. I'm not saying I have it all figured out as to why some churches feel very powerless and other churches feel like the Spirit of God is percolating. I do think it has a lot to do with faith. I do think that is part of the mix of what is going on. But I absolutely do think that there is a gift of healing, just like there is a gift of prophetic word. just like there is a gift of discernment, just like there is a gift of teaching. All of those gifts are listed in chapter 12. If you ever want to do a study on spiritual gifts, there are 4 books to read in the New Testament. You read Ephesians, chapter 3 and 4. I think it's 4. You read 1 Corinthians chapter 12. You read Peter, and you read Romans. You read all of those. Romans is like chapter, I think it's 12. That's the gift of leadership mentioned in Romans. But you see all these, and you'll see all these gifts available to the church. Let's press on. Let's see. And so he's verse 12. Are not Abana and Pharpar, rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? And you know, he's probably right. Israel's waters are not that great, except for the Sea of Galilee. Couldn't I wash and be cleansed in them? So he turned and went off in a rage. Now, thank God for people who speak truth to us. Naaman's servants went to him and said, my father, term of endearment. I think Naaman was a really good guy. I mean, even the captured slave girl wants to speak an encouraging word to Naaman. He seems to be a decent chap. My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times. Now, once again, see that number 7? Here's an example of why we understand 7 as a perfect number. It's just that when it shows up over and over and over again, good things happen or something is completed. That is why we understand 7 as a perfect number. So, wash and be cleansed, verse 14. So he went down, dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Now, this is a beautiful picture. Remember what he was called in the very first paragraph? Great man, victorious conqueror. The Hebrew is intentionally playing on that because this term could also be translated like a little girl. In other words, he is needing to become humble for this happen, to go into the dirty water, to not just dip himself once, to dip himself 7 times. Why does he get this advice? A young slave girl tells him, everything is leading to humility. Elisha doesn't even come to him. He just gets the servant coming. All of it comes down to humility. This is an attribute that the Lord wants to see nurtured in all of us. And so humility is just a beautiful picture here. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him. Now Elisha comes out. Interesting. Now he comes out. Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept this gift from your servant. That is such a statement of glory for God. There is but one God. Remember, all those other gods have existence impairment, not this God. The prophet answered, as surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept the thing. Now, here's a word to the faith healers of today. Don't make it connected with money. And for only $5.95, if you send your check in, I will send you the prayer handkerchief. Make your checks too. And then people send their checks in, and you're going to get the prayer hanky, sent to you. Put it on your sore, put it on your wound. That does not smell like Elisha here, does it? Now, I ain't going to take a dime from you. It's got to be independent of that. Because if he took it, it's implying that it's Elisha who did it. But it was the Lord who did it. So, it's a fascinating thing. Now, interesting question here shows up. And as surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept the thing. And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. If you will not, said Naaman, please let your servant be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also, when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may your Lord forgive your servant for doing this. And Elisha says, go in peace, implying that that's okay. Now, I want to show you, this is what it says in Exodus. Make an altar of earth for me, the sacrifice of your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your sheep, your goats, your cattle, whatever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones. If you do, you will defile it if you use a tool on it. This is an artist's rendition of an altar of earth. In other words, he's taking earth, he's going to probably make bricks out of it and make an altar that looks something like this. And he's doing it because he wants to worship the God of Israel on Israeli soil. Now, does he need to do that? No, you don't need it. But sometimes we need elements of faith. And, that's the way it is. Hold on one second there. And then I wanted to show you the way this is an image, artist rendition of the temple of Rimmon of the god Baal Hadad. Baal Hadad. Now, remember how I told you in Hebrew that they often change a letter to make the god seem more insulting. Remember the Lord of the Flies or the Lord of Poop? Well, this is one of these cases where they've taken this name and changed it. He's the fruit god. Now, technically, he is the god of storms. So if you were in Aram, that's the way we would think of him. He's the god of storms. But in Hebrew, the person who writes it, they always seem to take it let's change one letter and insult him. And I think it's partly because they don't want to give dignity to any god except Yahweh. And so in this case, it's the god of pomegranates. That's the technical name. So he's the god of pomegranates, the fruit god. So it's just commonly done that they mess with the name of these gods in Hebrew. I think that's kind of funny. Yes, what's the question?
So I have a question. I have a question and then a comment, but I'll leave for you to answer the question first.
Okay.
So the question is that it's, you see in two instances, right, in the Old Testament where I noticed you have two figures that are not Jewish, right, not Hebrew, where God helps them or honors them, right? And Naaman is one.
Mm-hmm.
And he even asked permission, can you go and give the burnt offering to that other god?
Right.
Right? And Elisha's like, it's fine, right? So, and then you have the second instance where the king of Egypt, where he has that dream about Sarah.
Right.
And God is like merciful to him, and he's like talks to him, and he says that I didn't need to take her as my wife. I didn't know any better, But you have these two instances where you have these two people who are not Jewish, who praise other gods, but God is merciful to them. God talks, God helps them in one way or another. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
I actually think it's a lot more than that. Because, at the very beginning of the passage, remember we talked about how God helped Nebuchadnezzar conquer Judah. And if you remember the time when Nebuchadnezzar, by the way, for those of you watching online, the point is God is seen in Scripture helping non-Jews and doing it a supernatural thing. But if you remember when Nebuchadnezzar had to eat grass and for 7 seasons, and when he comes out of that, he gives glory to God. And it's honored. It's treated very special. Never forget, all through the Scripture, Old Testament and New, it's ultimately about God receiving glory through what he does. In this case, it's Naaman who is now going to become a worshiper of Yahweh. Nebuchadnezzar becomes a worshiper of Yahweh. That is the theme. Even when you look at Nineveh, when everybody repents, And they implied is they become worshipers of Yahweh. That is the call. The missiologists, those who study mission in the Scripture, they say the New Testament is centrifugal, which I think is centrifugal and centrifugal. I sometimes get them confused. But one is sending things out. The other is drawing to the center. In the Old Testament, it is drawing in. In other words, that people will see there is no other God but this God. But in the New Testament, is sending people out to see this. But in both cases, it is to see, as the psalmist says, let the nations be glad. In other words, he wants his kingdom to be spreading all over. And so we'll see that in numerous cases in Scripture, where that good news, if you will, is being spread to other people, other lands.
So then how did Jewish people explain, Orthodox Jews and Jews, other types of Jews, they believe that the Word of God is only for them, but how did they explain these types of instances in the Bible?
Well, they would say that they would affirm that same thing, that because it's actually in the law of Torah that God makes provision for there to be seekers. If you remember the temple in Jerusalem, the temple that God prescribed, there is the court of the Gentiles, the court of the women, which just means Jewish men and women, and then the Holy of Holies, and the holy place. The court of the Gentiles is huge, and it's anticipating that Gentiles will come and worship God. So it's actually in the ebb and flow of Judaism that Gentiles will say, there's no other God but the God of Israel. So yes, it's through the Old Testament, but it definitely shows in the building of the temple. Let's press on. I don't want to miss my opportunity to getting this stuff done. And so Elisha says, go in peace, which seems to be a blessing that you can do what you're going to do, and you can take that with you. And then we have Gehazi the servant here. The servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, my master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. So Gehazi hurried after Naaman. When Naaman saw him running towards him, he got down from his chariot to meet him. Is everything all right? He asked. Everything's all right, Gehazi asked. My master sent me to say, 2 young men from the company of prophets have just come near me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing. By all means, take 2 talents, said Naaman. He urged Gehazi to accept them, and then tied up the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 sets of clothing. He gave them to his 2 servants, gave 2 of them to his servants, and carried them ahead of Gehazi. When Gehazi came to the hill, he took the things from the servants, put them away in his house, and sent the men away, and they left. When he went in and stood before his master, Elisha asked him, where have you been, Gehazi? Your servant didn't go anywhere, Gehazi answered. But Elisha said to him, was not my spirit with you when the man got down on his chariot to meet you? Is this the time to take money or to accept clothes or olive groves or vineyards or flocks and herds or male and female servants? Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and your descendants forever. Then Gehazi went from Elisha's presence. His skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. This is why I brought the conversation up with Pastor Nathan today, in just speculating. Gehazi is a liar. Absolutely. He stole, is really what it comes down to. But what I'm fascinated by is the declaration of judgment is not only on him, but his family forever. Now, in the Old Testament, you do see this principle that the sins of the parents are visited on the children. And then in Jeremiah, there's a description of the new covenant. This is, you have heard it said that the parents eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. But the day is coming when each person will be judged for their own sin, not for the sins of their parents. So this idea of passing on sin is evident in the Old Testament. And it's actually evident in our world too, in this. If you had a parent that was an alcoholic, there is a probability that you will be an alcoholic. So just to use an example of my wife's family, her grandparents, alcoholics. I mean, blatant alcoholics. Her parents, alcoholics. And so she gave the talk to all 4 of our kids. On my side of the family, alcoholism flows. Be very, very careful. Now, my wife drinks. She has an occasional margarita. She is a very moderate alcohol user, and I don't drink anything at all. But my point is, she always had the talk with our children. So that to me is an example of how sin can be passed on, in our own world, in our own time. So when Nathan and I are speculating on this is the question. Did God say, yes, this is endorsed for Elisha to curse Gehazi's family forever? Or is this God allowing Elisha to have this authority to do it? Is it just hyperbolic language? In other words, your family is going to be messed with. And also, if this is a contagious disease, did he just catch it from Naaman? And now you reaped what you sowed. You went to see a man with a skin disease that's contagious. Now you got it. And your family, they're going to get it too, because of, your sin. Now, here's what I mentioned. It's narrative passage. The camera is rolling. I would love if the author of Kings said, and Gehazi did this because the Lord declared. Or Elisha did this because the Lord told him. It seems like it was kind of a negative miracle, because it seems like he becomes leprous immediately. All I'm saying is it does cause me, the Bible student, to ask questions, of which I don't have complete answers to. And to me it seemed like a pretty stiff penalty for my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandkid to have leprosy because my great-great-great-great-great-grandparent did something stupid. I don't know the answers to that. I'll tell you what I think. I do think God granted Elisha authority. He uses authority. I do think it is hyperbolic language. In other words, it's impactful. I think it could be a nasty miracle of this disease is now on you. But I think it's also possible that he caught it and you reaped what you sow. In terms of he caught it from Naaman, the clothing, all this stuff. Because Naaman, mind you, had all this stuff with him when he was still leprous. And if he got it from that, you remember, middle of COVID, don't touch this, don't touch that. Everyone's afraid to get COVID from every possible source. We don't know. We don't know what kind of skin disease it is. We're unclear. You can take it at face value. Elisha said this, he gets leprosy, end of story. Happened forever. But it just causes me to ponder, because it does seem like the punishment is a bit stiff for what he did. So I'm just letting you know my wrestling with the passage. By the way, never be afraid of questions like that. Put it on the shelf. When you get to glory, you can ask. This is just letting us know what happened when it happened. Okay, let's press on. Chapter 6. The company of the prophets. So let me move to a different page here. Company of the prophets said to Elisha, "Look, the place where we meet is too small for us. Let us go to the Jordan where each of us can get a pole. Let us build a place so we can meet." So they want a prophet's house. We're going to have our school here. Remember, there's a school of the prophets. And he said, "Go." So then one of them said, "Won't you please come with your servants?" "I will," Elisha replied. And he went with them. They went to the Jordan and began to cut down trees. By the way, there's a principle of leadership. Don't ever be afraid to ask the big ask. In other words, Elisha wasn't going to go at first. And then they say, "Please come." And he did. So if you feel like the Lord is telling you to ask something big, ask. Why not? one of the most famous missiologists in the country. You wouldn't know him, but in the circles of those who plant churches, he is a giant. His name is Ed Stetzer. I've had him as a professor twice. So I thought, he'd never want to come to Long Island to do a seminar. And a friend of mine from a little small church in Port Jefferson invites him to come to do a seminar. And he says, yes. I said no for him. In other words, I didn't bother asking. My friend asked him, he come. Turns out this guy was born in Levittown. And Long Island is a warm fuzzy for him. He wasn't a Christian then, but he was born there. And so he wanted to come. I kick myself all the times I don't say ask. So I like that these prophets are proactive. Good leadership principle. Never say no for people. If the Lord is leading, by the way, it goes for dating too. Oh, he's too handsome. Oh, she's too pretty. Never say yes. Get over it. Maybe because she's too pretty, nobody asks her out. Be bold, be confident, and ask. There's nothing wrong with asking. So we go on. He comes. They went to the Jordan and began to cut down trees. As one of them was cutting down a tree, an iron axe head fell into the water. "Oh no, my lord," he cried out. "It was borrowed." The man of God asked, "Where did it fall?" When he showed him the place, Elisha cut a stick, threw it in there, and made the iron float. "Lift it out," he said. The man reached out his hand and took it. This is just one of those strange little stories that is fascinating to see. What do you do with that? All I can say is it happened, and it's pretty amazing. Iron does not float, and you can't come up with a scientific, the wood must have been made out of this and the iron was out of that. No, the iron floated. It's bizarre. It's strange. What I do find interesting in particular, though, of the story is that this guy could have just complained to one of the other prophets in the school, but the very fact that he brought it up with Elisha must have given the impression that maybe Elisha could do something about it. I love that, because that is just the inkling of faith that something could happen. Why not have that inkling of faith? To believe from a great God we expect great things. And this, I think, applies to trivial things, like an axe head. Oh, it was borrowed. Funny little story. My mother and father, they're in their 70s. This is back in the 2000s, early 2000s. And my father's still very healthy, mows his acre of land with a hand mower every day. But when you get older, sometimes you get thinner. And his wedding ring was not fitting well anymore. It falls off somewhere in 1 acre of grass. Seems gone. That's it. What are the odds of finding a man's wedding ring? And I say a man's because there's no sparkly stone on it. It was just a gold band lost in an acre of grass. My mother has always been one to say, why limit God what he can do? Yeah, it's a piece of metal. So she said, let's pray. And they prayed. They go outside. The sun hits a little sparkly on the lawn. They walk over and pick it up. I learned a lot from my mommy on that. Ask the Lord for everything. Don't say, here's another leadership principle. Don't say no for someone. Don't say the Lord's not interested in little things like that. The Lord is a big God. He can do whatever he wants. And so I do that all the time. I just got a kick out of it. My mother would be driving around the mall looking for a parking space near the door. And I was like, come on, Mom, we can walk a little bit. No, we're going to pray. Maybe the Lord will open up a spot. And inevitably, she gets a spot right by the front of the mall. And I'm like, I am not overthinking this. But I still enjoyed that level of faith that my mother exemplified. I think it's a good thing to have. I want to have that, twinkle in my eye. From a great God, we expect great things. Why not? Let's live with that anticipation. So we move now to the next amazing thing of Elisha. Verse 8. The king of Aram was at war with Israel. This is one of those skirmishes again. So we're back. You see Aram on this map. The borders are not mentioned on this map, but you can see Aram or Syria. I want to point out Samaria and Dothan, because these are going to come into play. Let's see. Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, I will set up camp in such and such a place. But the man of God sent word to the king of Israel. This is Elisha, the man of God. Beware of passing that place, because the Arameans are going down there. So the king of Israel checked on the place indicated by the man of God. Time and again, Elisha warned the king so that he was on his guard in such places. This enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, Tell me, which of us is on the side of the king of Israel? None of us, my lord the king, said one of his officers. But Elisha the prophet, who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. Pretty amazing here. Now, also curious, is Jehoram a good king? He is not a good king. He's a Baal worshiper. But this is God showing grace upon grace upon grace to the king of Israel, saying, can you get your heart together? Follow me? But in this case, and the other funny thing is, the king of Israel often wants to ignore Elisha, but this time he's taking his advice and listening to him. So, verse 13, go and find out where he is, the king ordered, so I can send men and capture him. The report came back, he is in Dothan. That's where you see it on the map. So you see where he was originally in Aram, and now he is in Dothan. Then he sent horses and chariots, a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, based on this passage, by the way, this is probably not Gehazi. It's probably another servant. In the morning, an army of horses and chariots surrounded the city. Oh no, my lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. Now, pause there for a moment. Every one of us in our lives has a moment when you want to pray this prayer. Oh Lord, what should we do? Everything seems disastrous. Everything seems hopeless. It's just natural. What are you going to do? I heard a commentator once, and I appreciated what he said. You know, when the 2008 recession came, he said, I've decided not to participate in it. I'm like, well, how do you avoid participating in the 2008 downturn? His point is, let me ask you a question for those who pay attention to Wall Street. Do all stocks go down in a downturn? No. I mean, take COVID. If you were highly invested in companies that produce plexiglass, masks, you made a killing. Because so what this gentleman did, he said, I'm just determining which companies are going to be profiteering in this downturn because of what is happening. My point in saying this, there is an ethos, a mindset. If you hang around depressing people, you are depressed. If you hang around victorious people, you feel victory. It's biblical when you see this kind of happening. This story I have told you guys, my first pastoral meeting I ever came to on Long Island. I'm coming from Illinois, Bible land near Wheaton College. There are big churches everywhere. I come here and there are little tiny scrawny churches everywhere. And I'm at the pastor's gathering and this man says, when I came to Long Island, I had a sign on my desk that said, reach the world for Christ. A few years later, I changed the sign to reach some for Christ. Now the sign on my desk says, try not to lose too many. And I had another pastor tell me Long Island is the boneyard of churches. I remember I told you Jim Cymbala came to the church. He was so shocked to see this church had people in it. He said, I didn't hear there were any big churches on Long Island. You know, and this was the mindset of so many people. But then I bumped into people that believe from a great God we expect great things. You know, one of them was my friend, Brian McMillan. I'm having lunch with him at a diner. He has this little fledgling church of 50 people called No Greater Love Christian Fellowship. And this kid, 24 years old, tells me, I will have the biggest church in Long Island. And I'm like, look at the chutzpah of this kid. But you know what? This past Easter, post-COVID, he had 3,100 people, the highest attendance of any church in Long Island. Pre-COVID, he had 3,600 people. That is a guy with faith. I like that. I hang out with people like that. And so I decided I will be friendly to the ones who are feeling like they're drowning, but I'm going to hang out with the ones who believe from a great God we expect great things. And if you have that mindset, on Sunday, did you see that number? We had close to 1,000 people in Syosset. If you've been in the Syosset campus, you're like, where did you put them? Why not expect great things? That's cool, to see that kind of thing. So this servant sees Long Island in 2008, hopeless, depressing, by the way, in 2008, it was a great year for all kinds of reasons. Everyone's losing money, downturn. We were doing great, phenomenally as a church. People were still giving. The New York Times decided to send a reporter here to see how evangelical churches were surviving the downturn. He sat right over there, and he sees the place packed. And the speaker that day was a young man we had working for us, a guy named Matt Merker, 21 years old, delivers the message that day. And he took note. The place is packed. They have this young preacher, 21 years old, and he writes this front page article of the New York Times. Yes, I do still have a copy. But my point is, why participate in everyone's depression? If God is who he says he is, it doesn't matter if there's an army parked outside of your door. What is Elisha about to say to his servant? I'll let you know. There are more with us than there are against us. So here we go. Don't be afraid, verse 16, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed, open his eyes, Lord, that he may see. Oh, this is the best prayer ever. Then the Lord opens the servant's eyes. He looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. These are the same chariots that took Elijah away, all around. Man, give me eyes like this. That's faith. That is when you're seeing what nobody else can see. And I love that. And we can have that in our world. So why not believe that this church, which when I came to it had 400 people, which is a big church on Long Island, it was a very big church, could one day have 3,000 at Easter? Why not? I mean, don't get me wrong, I had no faith for that at the time. But what I did have faith for, that's we can grow. I had absolute faith that we could grow and that God could do something great in our midst. So I just love this passage. Pray this prayer. Lord, open my eyes. Help me to see what I would not see without you. As the enemy came down towards him, Elisha prayed, strike the army with blindness. So he struck them with blindness as Elisha had asked. Elisha's a pretty amazing prophet. Now get this. So he struck them with blindness. Elisha told them, this is not the road, this is not the city. These are not the soldiers you're looking for. These are not the droids you're looking for. I'm giving Star Wars analogy here. I'm using my Jedi, imagery here. Some scholars think it wasn't a literal blindness. It was a total confusion that he gave them. If you want a metaphorical blindness. In other words, where are we? I don't know where we are. You want to go make a left turn over there. Oh, okay. And the reason the scholars think that is because they can still see where they're walking, but it's a question of they have no clue where they are anymore. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you are looking for. And he led them to Samaria. So he's leading them to the capital of his country, an army. After they entered the city, Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see. And the Lord opened their eyes, and they looked, and there were inside Samaria. In other words, this is the wrong place for them to be. When the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elijah, shall I kill them, my father? Shall I kill them? Now, this is where Elisha makes me scratch my head. Gehazi, everyone in your family is going to have leprosy until they die, forever. But here, don't kill them. Would you kill those who have captured your own sword and bow? Set food and water before them so they may eat and drink and then go back to their master. So he prepared a great feast for them, and after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away. They returned to their master, so the bands of Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. Now this is interesting on the level. This was a victory that paid dividends because they showed kindness was received. In other words, you let the soldiers all come back to their families. Why are we invading Israel? They're good people. And suddenly it stops. This whole story is, again, fascinating. Take away, pray in faith, believe that God was going to open my eyes to see what I would not see otherwise. In my own life, I'll tell you where I'm praying that God would open my eyes. I have a plan at some point to move to Nevada. What does that look like? Will there be a church that hires me? Will there be a place for me to go? It's murky right now. I don't know what God has in store. So I am praying, Lord, give me faith that when I go, you will make straight the path for me. What does Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 say? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. Or if King James, he will guide your steps. So that's what I'm looking for in my own life. I pray, Lord, open my eyes that I can see and trust what he's doing. But all of us can do that. Let's press on. Famine in besieged Samaria. Okay. Sometime later, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, so we're dealing with Aram, all these things, mobilized his entire army and marched up and laid siege to Samaria. So again, you see in this map, Aram comes down. The impression is this is not an incursion. This is a full invasion of the walled city in Samaria. There was a great famine in the city. The siege lasted so long that a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver, and a quarter of a cab of seed pods, which, by the way, is edible poop, sold for 5 shekels. 5 shekels would be 6 months' wages. So donkey heads are not real attractive food. One of the shows my wife and I love to watch, I've told you, is Chopped. And they always give these crazy ingredients. Like, you are to make a delicious appetizer with this goat's head, or they'll give the remains of a fish. Here's fish heads. Make a delicious appetizer with this. And you're like, how are they going to do this? It's like amazing. But a goat's head is highly prized. In other words, they've eaten the rest of the goat, but the parts that nobody wants to eat, people are doing. As the king of Israel was passing on the wall, a woman cried out to him, help me, my lord the king. The king replied, if the Lord does not help you, where can I get help for you? From the threshing floor? There's no grain there. From the winepress? There's no grapes there. Then he asked her, what's the matter? So he's figuring that she's asking for help on providing food. But she's not. She just wants the king to be a judge. But what he wants to judge over is unbearable to even hear. She answered, the woman said to me, give up your son so that we may eat him today, and tomorrow we'll eat my son. So we cooked my son and ate him. The next day I said to her, give up your son so we may eat him. But she has hidden him. When the king heard the woman's words, he tore his robes. As he went along the wall, the people looked and saw that under his robes he had sackcloth on his body. Now, this is horrific, absolutely horrific to read. It actually shows up in a few places, this kind of thing. In fact, it shows up for Jerusalem in the book of Lamentations. Jeremiah the prophet says he's observing this kind of thing happening in Jerusalem with the siege of Nebuchadnezzar. Horrific. I mean, you can't even see how can this even happen. You know, it's beyond imagination. I can see why the king tore his robes. So who should the king blame? Could blame the king of Aram. Could consider maybe it's because I worship Baal. But no, let's blame the prophet of God, Elisha. Verse 31, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if... I cannot read the time, by the way. Somebody read me the time.
9 o'clock.
It's 9 o'clock?
9:02.
Oh my goodness. We're going to have to stop. We're going to finish this little section, but then we will stop. We're going to end with a crummy area, though. Sorry about that. My problem is my distance sight is not as good as it used to be. If the head of Elisha, son of Shaphat, remains on his shoulders today. Now Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. These are the elders of the community. And the king sent a messenger ahead. Before he arrived, Elisha said to the elders, don't you see this murderer is sending someone off to cut my head? Look, when the messengers come, shut the door, hold it shut against them. Is not the sound of my master's footsteps behind him? While he was still talking to them, the messenger came down to him. The king said, this disaster is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? Elisha replied, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says. About this time tomorrow, a seah, that's 7 quarts, of the finest flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. The officer whose arm the king was leaning said to the man of God, look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of heaven, could this happen? You will see it with your own eyes, answered Elisha, but you will not eat of any of it. So, that is, I want to tell you the rest of the story, but I have to hold back. Anyway, I can tell you this. It works out good. It works out good. I just have one picture I want to show you that relates to this. This is a city gate like the one in Samaria. So in the ancient world, you see a gate is always like this, a multi-chambered gate. Now what they did here is through an artist's rendition, they built up the one side of this picture as to what it would look in the ancient days and what you see when you go there today in terms of the remains. Remember that in the ancient world, the city gate is the seat of government. Do you remember Proverbs 31, where you talk about a Proverbs 31 woman? That the husband will praise his wife at the city gate. That is the implication that the husband is a government official sitting in the gate. This is where you got your driver's license renewed. This is where you did all your government affairs. This is where you asked for a judge to adjudicate something. But when there is war, you actually close these gates and fill these chambers with armaments to defend your gate. I just wanted you to see this because what's going to happen, there are these leprous guys hanging out by the gate that say, should we sit out here and go to the Arameans and be killed by them, or should we go into the city and die because there's starvation there? What should we do? And they decide to go to the Arameans and check out their luck. And I'll leave to next week what happens. But you can read ahead and discover. Let's pray. Father, we thank you that we've had a chance to go through some very fascinating passages about the prophet Elisha and to see his miraculous hand that you empowered. The passage raises some questions that are challenging to us, but one thing we see is that you are God and that you are in control. And so, Father, when we look at our own lives, I pray that this truth would be evident, that you would open our eyes, that you would help us to see there are more with us than against us, and that we would believe that if God is on our side, from a great God, we expect great things. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you guys for coming, and Pastor Nathan will be here next week, and Lord willing, we'll have a great class, and I'll be back after that.